A first-class passenger refuses to sit next to a black pilot. Her reaction after learning the truth will leave you speechless. Elizabeth Caldwell's Louboutin heels clicked purposefully across JFK Airport's polished floors, the sound echoing her authority with each step. As CEO of Caldwell Industries, she had mastered the art of commanding attention without seeking it. Her tailored Chanel suit and perfectly coiffed blonde hair were as much a part of her armor as her Harvard MBA and 20 years of corporate experience. The first-class lounge welcomed her with its familiar embrace of exclusivity. Beth, as she was known to few, settled into her usual corner with a glass of aged Bordeaux. Her laptop opened to quarterly reports while she waited for her flight to London, another routine business trip to oversee her company's European expansion. "Ms. Caldwell, would you like me to have your usual breakfast prepared?" Thomas, the lounge attendant who had served her countless times before, appeared at her elbow. "Yes, the egg white omelet with spinach," she replied without looking up from her screen. "And please ensure my seat arrangement remains as requested. Window seat, first row." Her fingers paused over the keyboard as she reflected on her morning routine. Everything in her world operated with precision, like a well-oiled machine. She had worked tirelessly to reach this position, to earn these privileges. The early morning flights in first class, the preferential treatment, the respect, these weren't luxuries to her. They were standards she had earned. Her phone buzzed with a message from her board of directors. Another successful quarter, another round of congratulations. Beth allowed herself a small smile. She had fought her way to the top of a male-dominated industry, breaking through glass ceilings with a combination of brilliance and determination. Her standards weren't just about comfort. They were about maintaining the image and authority she had sacrificed so much to build. The boarding announcement echoed through the lounge, and Beth gathered her belongings with practiced efficiency. As she approached the priority boarding line, she mentally reviewed her London agenda. Board meetings, acquisition discussions, and a charity gala, all opportunities to reinforce her position in the corporate world. "Good morning, Ms. Caldwell," the gate agent beamed. "We're delighted to have you with us today." Beth nodded in acknowledgement, her mind already on the 7-hour flight ahead. She had specifically chosen this flight for its timing and service record. Everything had to be perfect. It was the only way she knew how to operate. As she walked down the jet bridge, Beth reflected on her journey. From a middle-class family in Connecticut to the helm of a Fortune 500 company, she had learned that success demanded control. Control over her environment, her image, and most importantly, her standards. The familiar scent of leather and subtle perfume greeted her as she entered the first-class cabin. This was her domain, a carefully curated space where everything was predictable, controlled, and aligned with her expectations. Little did Beth know that today's flight would challenge every standard she had so carefully maintained. As she settled into her seat, arranging her belongings with mechanical precision, the universe was preparing to disrupt her perfectly ordered world in ways she could never have anticipated. She pulled out her tablet, scanning through the morning's financial reports with practiced ease. The numbers told a story of success, but they also reinforced the walls she had built around herself. Walls of privilege, presumption, and prejudice that she didn't even realize existed. The cabin crew began their pre-flight preparations, and Beth absently checked her seat partner's status on the flight manifest displayed on her screen. Dr. James Carter. The name meant nothing to her then, but in a few hours, it would mean everything. As other first-class passengers began boarding, Beth maintained her bubble of isolation, perfected over years of travel. She had mastered the art of being simultaneously present and detached, a skill that had served her well in boardrooms, but had perhaps cost her more than she realized in terms of genuine human connection. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a golden glow across her workspace. Beth Caldwell was in her element, surrounded by the trappings of success she had fought so hard to achieve. But sometimes, the greatest lessons come when we're forced to step outside our carefully constructed comfort zones. And this flight was about to become anything but comfortable. Beth's perfectly orchestrated morning hit its first discordant note when Dr. James Carter approached her row. Her eyes flickered up briefly, then again with poorly concealed surprise. A tall, distinguished black man in his mid-50s, wearing an impeccably tailored suit, was carefully storing his carry-on in the overhead compartment. Her manicured fingers instinctively tightened around her tablet. This wasn't what she had expected. First class was her sanctuary, a carefully curated space where she typically found herself among familiar faces from the corporate world. Mostly white, mostly male, all bearing the unmistakable polish of old money and established power. "Good morning, Dr." Carter said warmly, his voice carrying a rich baritone that commanded attention without demanding it. His smile was genuine, professional, and somehow both disarming and distant. Beth managed a tight-lipped smile in return, one that didn't reach her eyes. As Dr. Carter settled into his seat, she found herself shifting slightly toward the window, creating an invisible barrier between them. Her mind raced through possibilities. Surely there had been some mistake in the seating arrangement. She pressed the call button, and within moments, Sarah, the lead flight attendant, appeared with a practiced smile. "How may I help you, Miss Caldwell?" Beth lowered her voice to a whisper, though not quite low enough. "Sarah, I was wondering if there might be another available seat in first class. Perhaps something by itself?" Dr. Carter appeared absorbed in his medical journal, but the slight stiffening of his shoulders suggested he hadn't missed a word. Sarah's professional smile didn't waver, but her eyes held firm. "I apologize, Ms. Caldwell, but we're fully booked in first class today. I can assure you that all our passengers here are premium status members or highly respected professionals." The subtle emphasis on her last words wasn't lost on Beth, who felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. She wasn't used to being denied anything, especially not in first class. "I see," Beth replied, her voice tight. "Thank you anyway." As Sarah walked away, Beth became acutely aware of Dr. Carter's composed presence beside her. While she fidgeted with her tablet, adjusted her seat, and repeatedly checked her phone, he remained perfectly still, emanating a sense of peace that seemed to mock her discomfort. He turned a page in his journal, and Beth caught a glimpse of complex medical diagrams. His hands were surgeon's hands, steady, precise, with an inherent grace that spoke of years of delicate work. A gold wedding band gleamed on his left hand, and a prestigious hospital's ID badge peeked out from his breast pocket. The pre-flight announcements began, and Beth found herself stealing glances at her seat companion. Dr. Carter's responses to the cabin crew were unfailingly polite, his movements deliberate and elegant. He seemed completely unruffled by her earlier attempt to change seats, as if such reactions were so commonplace they had ceased to merit any emotional response. This, somehow, made Beth feel even worse. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, Dr. Carter closed his journal and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Beth noticed his monogrammed pen, a Montblanc, the same brand she favored. He began making notes in a precise, measured hand, the kind of handwriting that suggested both intelligence and discipline. The irony wasn't lost on Beth that she was analyzing every detail about him, looking for flaws or inconsistencies that might justify her initial reaction. Instead, each observation only served to highlight her own prejudices. Sarah passed by again, offering pre-flight drinks. "Dr. Carter," she said warmly, "your usual sparkling water with lime?" "Thank you, Sarah," he replied with a smile that transformed his entire face. "How's your daughter doing in her first year of medical school?" "Loving every minute of it, thanks to your mentorship program," Sarah beamed. Beth sank slightly lower in her seat, her expensive wine suddenly tasting bitter. Not only was Dr. Carter obviously a regular on this route, but he was also the kind of person who remembered personal details about the crew and apparently ran mentorship programs. The plane accelerated down the runway, and Beth felt her carefully constructed world of assumptions beginning to shake. As they lifted off into the morning sky, she couldn't help but feel that more than just her physical journey to London was about to take an unexpected turn. Dr. Carter pulled out a book, Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens, and began reading, his presence beside her as solid and unshakable as a mountain. Beth found herself trapped between her ingrained prejudices and the undeniable evidence of her own biased behavior. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and Beth had never felt more firmly buckled into place. At cruising altitude, Beth tried to focus on her quarterly reports, but her attention kept drifting to her seat companion. The gentle tapping of Dr. Carter's pen against his notebook had become a rhythmic reminder of his presence, each tap echoing her growing discomfort with her own behavior. She observed him through carefully measured glances. His cufflinks caught her attention. They weren't the flashy status symbols common among corporate executives, but elegant silver pieces shaped like vintage aircraft. When he reached for his water, she noticed a worn spot on his leather briefcase, suggesting it was chosen for function rather than fashion. These weren't the choices of someone trying to prove their worth. They were the markers of someone comfortable in their own skin. "More wine, Miss Caldwell?" Sarah appeared with the drink cart. "Please," Beth replied, grateful for the distraction. As Sarah poured, Beth noticed her stealing admiring glances at Dr. Carter, who was now deeply engrossed in reviewing what appeared to be medical charts. "Sarah," Beth found herself whispering, her curiosity finally overwhelming her reserve. "You seem to know Dr. Carter well?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, Dr. Carter is one of our most respected passengers. He flies this route twice a month for his work at London's Royal Children's Hospital. He's pioneering a revolutionary cardiac surgery technique for infants." Beth felt her chest tighten. "A pediatric cardiac surgeon." The words hit her like a physical blow, each one hammering at her earlier assumptions. "Last month," Sarah continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "he performed an emergency procedure during a flight to save a child who had a severe allergic reaction. He's quite remarkable." The information washed over Beth in waves. While she had been trying to change seats, this man had probably been reviewing cases of children whose lives depended on his skilled hands. Dr. Carter's phone buzzed softly, and Beth couldn't help but notice the background image. A group photo of him surrounded by smiling medical students of various ethnicities. Another crack appeared in her prejudiced armor. "Dr. Carter," Sarah added, almost as an afterthought. "Would you like to review the menu for lunch? Chef included your favorite salmon dish today." "Thank you, Sarah," he replied warmly. "Though I might need to work through lunch. I have a complicated case waiting for me in London." His voice carried no hint of boasting, just quiet dedication. Beth watched as he returned to his medical charts, his focus absolute. She recognized that level of commitment. It was the same intensity she brought to her corporate takeovers. But while she moved numbers around spreadsheets, he literally held lives in his hands. The reality of her earlier behavior began to settle like a heavy weight in her stomach. She had taken one look at this man and made assumptions that said far more about her than they did about him. Every detail she learned seemed designed to challenge her preconceptions. His evident expertise, his dedication to teaching, his calm professionalism in the face of her thinly veiled prejudice. A bout of light turbulence caused her wine to slosh in its glass. Dr. Carter automatically reached out to steady it before it could spill on her laptop, his reflexes quick and precise. "Careful," he said simply, offering her a napkin. "Thank you." Beth managed the words, feeling insufficient. Sarah passed by again, this time with another flight attendant in tow. "Amanda, this is Dr. Carter, the surgeon I was telling you about. His team's research on pediatric heart valve replacement is revolutionary." Dr. Carter smiled modestly. "We still have a long way to go, but every success gives another child a chance at a full life." Beth pretended to be absorbed in her tablet, but she was actually processing everything she was hearing. This man wasn't just successful. He was changing lives. While she had been building her fortune, he had been building futures for countless children. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, who prided herself on being a forward-thinking CEO championing women in corporate leadership, had so quickly succumbed to racial prejudice. The same barrier she had fought against in her own career, she had thoughtlessly tried to reinforce against someone else. As the plane continued its journey across the Atlantic, Beth felt increasingly turbulent thoughts churning inside her. Her carefully constructed worldview was being challenged not by confrontation or accusation, but by the quiet excellence of the man beside her. Dr. Carter's pager buzzed. Yes, a pager, because as Sarah quietly explained to another curious passenger, many hospitals still relied on them for their reliability in critical areas. Another detail that spoke to the real-world importance of his work. far removed from the digital-dependent corporate world Beth inhabited. The sun streamed through the window, casting both their reflections on the darkened screen of her tablet. Two successful professionals, sitting side by side, yet worlds apart in their impact on humanity. Beth had never felt more humbled or more ashamed of her initial reaction. Little did she know, the most challenging part of her journey was yet to come. The first serious jolt came without warning. Beth's laptop nearly flew off her tray table as the aircraft lurched violently. Outside the window, dark clouds had gathered, transforming the serene blue skies into an ominous gray mass. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," a voice crackled over the intercom. "We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately." The plane dropped suddenly, eliciting gasps from several passengers. Beth's knuckles whitened as she gripped her armrests, her carefully maintained composure cracking. She had flown hundreds of times, but something about this turbulence felt different, more threatening. "Try focusing on the horizon line, Dr. Carter's calm voice cut through her rising panic. "It helps maintain your spatial orientation." Beth turned to him, surprised by both his composed demeanor and the fact that he had chosen to break their tacit silence. His hands were steady as he closed his medical files, not a trace of concern on his face. Another violent shake rattled the cabin. "Is this normal?" Beth found herself asking, her voice smaller than she'd ever allow in a boardroom. "Quite normal, actually," Dr. Carter replied, his voice carrying a reassuring authority. "We're experiencing what's called clear air turbulence. It's caused by irregular air movements that aren't visible to radar or the naked eye." The plane shuddered again, but Beth found herself oddly comforted by his technical explanation. "You seem to know a lot about aviation," she observed, genuine curiosity replacing her earlier prejudice. A slight smile crossed his face. "I was in the Air Force before medical school. Flew F-16s for 8 years. Understanding the physics of flight helps put these moments in perspective." Beth felt her eyes widen. Fighter pilot turned pediatric surgeon. Each new revelation about this man made her earlier behavior seem more shameful. "You see," he continued, gesturing to the wing outside their window, "modern aircraft are designed to handle forces far greater than what we're experiencing. Those wings can flex up to 90 degrees without structural failure." Another drop, but this time Beth found herself listening intently rather than gripping the armrests. "The sensation of falling is actually just a rapid change in air pressure," Dr. Carter explained. "The aircraft is constantly making micro-adjustments to maintain stability. Like a surgical procedure," Beth found herself saying. "Constant small adjustments to maintain the optimal course." Dr. Carter's eyes lit up with appreciation for the analogy. "Exactly. In both cases, it's about responding to changing conditions while keeping sight of the ultimate goal." The conversation flowed naturally now, their earlier tension dissolved by shared understanding. Beth found herself engaged in a fascinating discussion about the parallels between aviation, surgery, and even corporate leadership, all fields requiring precision, quick thinking, and grace under pressure. In the operating room, like in the cockpit, panic is never helpful, Dr. Carter shared. "The key is to trust your training, trust your team, and maintain clear communication." The turbulence continued, but Beth barely noticed it now. She was too engrossed in their conversation, discovering layers of wisdom in this man she had so quickly dismissed hours earlier. "How did you transition from fighter pilot to pediatric surgeon?" she asked, genuinely intrigued by his unusual career path. "Life has a way of showing us our true calling," he replied thoughtfully. "I was inspired by a military doctor who saved my wingman's child. Watching him work, seeing the impact he had, it showed me another way to serve." The plane steadied slightly, and Sarah appeared to check on the passengers. She smiled warmly at seeing Beth and Dr. Carter engaged in conversation. "Dr. Carter's being modest," Sarah interjected. "He's not just any surgeon. He's developed techniques that have revolutionized pediatric cardiac surgery. Procedures that were once considered impossible are now routine thanks to his work." Beth noticed Dr. Carter's humble shrug at the praise. Here was a man who had literally saved countless lives, yet carried his achievements with quiet dignity. The real heroes are the children, he said softly. Their resilience, their courage. They teach me something new every day. As the turbulence finally began to subside, Beth realized something had shifted within her. The physical storm outside had catalyzed an internal transformation. Her fear of the turbulence had forced her to see past her prejudices, to engage with the remarkable individual beside her. "Thank you," she said simply, meaning it for more than just the aviation lesson. Dr. Carter nodded, understanding passing between them. "Sometimes," he said, "the roughest passages lead us to the clearest skies." The seatbelt sign dinged off, but neither of them moved to unbuckle. They had found something rare at 35,000 feet. A genuine connection forged in the crucible of shared experience and honest conversation. The storm had passed, but its impact would prove lasting. The afternoon sun pierced through the dissipating clouds as their conversation deepened. Beth found herself leaning slightly toward Dr. Carter, genuinely invested in his story as he began sharing his journey. "I fell in love with flying at age 7, he began, his eyes taking on a distant look. "My father worked as a janitor at a small regional airport. Every evening after his shift, he'd take me to watch the planes take off. I'd tell him, 'Daddy, one day I'm going to fly one of those.'" He paused, a subtle smile playing at his lips. The look on his face. He believed in me completely, even though neither of us had ever seen a black pilot at that airport. Beth felt a familiar tightness in her chest, but this time it wasn't from turbulence. She recognized the weight of being the first or only one in a space. "In high school, Dr. Carter continued, my guidance counselor suggested I consider more realistic career options, but I had the highest math and science scores in my class. The Air Force Academy wasn't just a dream, it was my destiny." "Did you face resistance?" Beth asked carefully, aware of her own role in perpetuating such barriers mere hours ago. "Daily," he replied without bitterness. "In flight school, some refused to fly with me. Others made bets on how quickly I'd wash out. One instructor told me straight to my face that some cockpits aren't meant to be integrated." Beth winced at the raw honesty. Her own earlier attempt to change seats suddenly felt even more shameful. "But here's what they didn't understand." Dr. Carter leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying quiet strength. "Every barrier they put up just made me more determined. I graduated top of my class, became a flight instructor, flew combat missions in Desert Storm. Excellence was my answer to prejudice." "And then you switched to medicine," Beth prompted, fascinated by his trajectory. "Yes, though that brought its own challenges. Try being a 40-year-old black man starting medical school," he chuckled, but there was a hint of old pain beneath the humor. "Some patients would request different doctors before I'd even entered the room. Others assumed I was part of the janitorial staff, even when I was wearing my white coat and stethoscope." Beth thought about her own corporate world, how few faces like Dr. Carter she saw in boardrooms and executive lounges. "In my industry," she found herself sharing, "we talk about diversity initiatives and inclusion programs, but the numbers don't reflect the rhetoric." Dr. Carter finished her thought. "It's not enough to open doors if we don't also challenge the assumptions about who belongs behind them." He shared a story about a recent medical conference where he was keynoting. "I arrived early, and 3 different people asked me for coffee or directions to the restroom. When I took the stage, I could see their faces turn red. But you know what? I opened my speech by talking about those interactions." "How did they respond?" Beth asked, completely engaged. "Some were uncomfortable, others defensive. But discomfort often precedes growth. In medicine, like in aviation and business, lives depend on getting the best people in the right positions, regardless of what they look like." Beth thought about her own company's hiring practices, the unconscious biases in their promotion systems. "We have diversity targets," she admitted, "but maybe we're not addressing the deeper issues." "Targets are just numbers," Dr. Carter replied thoughtfully. "Real change happens in those small moments of decision. When someone chooses to mentor an unlikely candidate, when assumptions are challenged, when excellence is recognized regardless of its package." He shared another memory, this time about a young black medical student he'd mentored. She told me that seeing me in the operating room was the first time she believed she could be a surgeon. Representation matters, but so does active support. Beth found herself taking mental notes, seeing her corporate world through new eyes. How many talented individuals had been overlooked because they didn't fit the expected mold? How many innovations had been lost because of unchallenged prejudices? In the air, Dr. Carter said, physics doesn't care about the color of the pilot's skin. In surgery, the heart doesn't beat differently based on the surgeon's race. Excellence is universal, but opportunity isn't. What can we do? Beth asked, the question carrying the weight of genuine commitment. Start by acknowledging our own biases, he replied, giving her a knowing look that held no judgment, only understanding. Then work actively to counteract them. Create pathways, not just policies. Build bridges, not just benchmarks. As they talked, Beth realized she was experiencing a masterclass in leadership, humanity, and grace. Dr. Carter had taken her prejudiced behavior and transformed it into a teaching moment, without shame or accusation. The conversation shifted to specific strategies for creating meaningful change, and Beth found herself sharing her own experiences as a woman breaking into male-dominated spaces. They discovered common ground in their experiences of being the only one in their respective fields, though Beth acknowledged the additional layers of challenge Dr. Carter had faced. The key, Dr. Carter concluded, is to ensure that our success serves as more than personal achievement. It must become a gateway for others to follow. As the sun continued its westward journey outside their window, Beth knew she was experiencing more than just a conversation. She was witnessing a blueprint for transformation, both personal and institutional. The dinner service had ended, and the cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow. Beth stared at her reflection in the darkened window, seeing herself with new clarity. The perfectly coiffed exterior remained unchanged, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. You're quiet, Dr. Carter observed gently, looking up from his medical journal. I'm remembering something, Beth replied slowly. My first board meeting as CEO. I walked into that room, 14 men, all white, all over 50, and one of them asked me to fetch coffee. She paused, her fingers unconsciously tracing the rim of her water glass. I was wearing a $2,000 suit and carrying the company's turnaround strategy. Dr. Carter nodded, understanding the weight of the memory. And how did that make you feel? Angry, humiliated, but mostly I felt this overwhelming need to prove myself. Beth's voice carried years of accumulated determination. I delivered that presentation flawlessly. By the end of it, they knew exactly who I was. And yet, Dr. Carter added softly, earlier today, the words hung in the air between them. Beth felt the full impact of the parallel he was drawing. She had become what she had once fought against. I've spent my entire career fighting to be taken seriously, she continued, the realization dawning painfully. Breaking glass ceilings, proving I belonged. But somewhere along the way, I started guarding those same doors I had struggled to open. Dr. Carter listened intently, his presence encouraging without judgment. Last month, Beth confessed, I was reviewing candidates for a senior position. There was this brilliant applicant, impressive credentials, innovative ideas. But I remember thinking his name sounded too ethnic. I suggested we look for someone who would be a better fit. The memory made her wince. I became the very thing I despised. The hardest mirrors to look into, Dr. Carter offered, are the ones that show us our unconscious biases. But recognition is the first step toward change. Beth thought about her company's leadership team, predominantly white, predominantly male. How many talented individuals had she overlooked? How many voices had been silenced before they could even speak? I built my reputation on being a champion for women in business, she said, more to herself than to Dr. Carter. I give speeches about breaking barriers. I mentor young women executives, but I've been selective about which barriers I chose to see. We often fight hardest against the injustices we've personally experienced, Dr. Carter observed. The challenge is extending that same passion to battles that aren't our own. A memory surfaced. A young black woman in her company's junior executive program who had left after 2 years. Beth had attributed it to cultural fit issues without ever questioning what that really meant. "I've been part of the problem," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps, Dr. Carter agreed, but you can also be part of the solution. Awareness without action is just guilt. Action without awareness is just tokenism. You need both." Beth straightened in her seat, her business mind already beginning to formulate strategies. "We need systematic changes. Blind recruitment processes, diverse interview panels, mentorship programs. Those are good starts," Dr. Carter nodded. "But real change begins with smaller moments. Like choosing to see someone for their potential rather than their appearance. Like questioning our initial reactions and assumptions." The irony wasn't lost on Beth that this conversation wouldn't have happened if the flight hadn't been full, if she had succeeded in changing seats. Her attempt to avoid discomfort had almost cost her this valuable lesson. "You know what's interesting?" she mused. "I've spent years building walls to protect my position, thinking I was maintaining standards. But those walls weren't just keeping others out, they were limiting my own growth." Dr. Carter smiled warmly. "The best leaders I've known understand that true strength lies not in maintaining barriers, but in building bridges." Beth thought about tomorrow's board meeting in London. She had planned to present their usual quarterly numbers, but now she saw an opportunity for a different kind of conversation. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for holding up this mirror, even when the reflection was uncomfortable to see." "Sometimes," Dr. Carter replied, "the most important journeys aren't the ones that take us across oceans, but the ones that take us deeper into understanding ourselves." As the plane continued its journey through the night sky, Beth pulled out her tablet and began making notes. But this time, instead of quarterly projections and market analyses, she was drafting a new vision, one that would transform her company's culture from the inside out. The reflection in her window now showed someone different. Not just a successful CEO, but a leader on the verge of meaningful change. As the flight entered its final hours, Beth and Dr. Carter's conversation evolved from personal reflection to practical action. The barrier between them had completely dissolved, replaced by a shared vision of institutional change. "Tell me about your mentorship program," Beth began, her CEO mindset engaging with renewed purpose. "Sarah mentioned it helped her daughter get into medical school." Dr. Carter's face lit up with pride. "We call it Wings and Scalpels. It started small, just me working with a few underprivileged students who showed interest in medicine. Now we have over 50 practicing physicians, mentoring hundreds of students from diverse backgrounds." "Wings and Scalpels?" Beth questioned, intrigued by the name. "A nod to my dual careers," he smiled. "We teach them that success, like flight, requires both lift and precision. The program doesn't just help with medical school applications. We provide ongoing support throughout their journey." Beth leaned forward, her business acumen detecting something valuable. "What's your success rate?" 87% of our students get into medical school, and 92% of those graduate. But more importantly," he added, "they're returning to serve in underrepresented communities. They're creating a ripple effect of change." Beth quickly did the mental math. These were impressive metrics by any standard. "Have you considered expanding beyond medicine?" "Actually, Dr. Carter replied, "we've had interest from other sectors. Law firms, tech companies, even a few financial institutions. The principles are universal: mentorship, practical support, and community building." "What if," Beth began, her mind racing with possibilities, "Caldwell Industries created a parallel program in corporate leadership? We could share resources, expand the network." "Cross-pollination," Dr. Carter nodded approvingly. "Medical students learning about business principles, corporate interns understanding healthcare challenges, breaking down silos while building opportunities." They spent the next hour sketching out ideas on Beth's tablet. Her corporate strategy experience merged seamlessly with his program development insights. What started as a casual conversation was evolving into a comprehensive initiative. "The key," Dr. Carter emphasized, "is authentic commitment. These young people can spot tokenism a mile away." "Agreed," Beth replied, thinking of her company's previous superficial attempts at diversity. "We need structural changes, not just window dressing. Board involvement, dedicated resources, measurable outcomes. And personal investment from leadership, Dr. Carter added. When I mentor someone, they get my direct number. They know they can reach me anytime. Beth thought about her own packed schedule. It would mean reorganizing priorities. Like any worthwhile surgery, Dr. Carter smiled. Sometimes you need to reconstruct before you can heal. They exchanged contact information, but this was more than just networking. They were forming an alliance, bridging their different worlds for a common purpose. I have a board meeting tomorrow, Beth shared. Instead of just presenting quarterly results, I'm going to propose this initiative. We have the resources, the platform, and now, thanks to you, the vision. And I have a medical conference next month, Dr. Carter responded. Would you consider being a guest speaker? Your perspective on leadership and organizational change would be valuable. Beth found herself agreeing without hesitation. A month ago, she might have questioned the relevance of addressing a medical audience. Now she saw the power of crossing boundaries. We should establish regular check-ins, she suggested, falling naturally into project planning mode. Monthly video calls to align our efforts? And quarterly in-person meetings, Dr. Carter added. Perhaps alternating between London and New York? They discussed logistics, success metrics, and expansion strategies. Beth's corporate expertise complemented Dr. Carter's community-based approach. They were building something unique, a bridge between their respective worlds. You know what strikes me? Beth reflected. This morning, I tried to create distance between us. Now we're planning a partnership that could impact thousands of lives. Life has a wonderful way of putting us exactly where we need to be, Dr. Carter replied, even if we resist it at first. Sarah passed by their seats, smiling at their evident collaboration. Can I get you anything? We'll be starting our descent in about an hour. Actually, Beth responded, could you bring us some paper? We need to map out a few more ideas. As they worked together in the dim cabin, Beth realized they had created more than just a business plan. They had established a blueprint for genuine change, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The London lights were beginning to twinkle on the horizon, but for Beth and Dr. Carter, this journey was just beginning. As the plane descended toward Heathrow, the London skyline glittered in the early morning light. Beth found herself in an unusual state, both exhausted and energized, as if she had undergone a personal metamorphosis during the 7-hour flight. Dr. Carter, she began, then corrected herself. James, would you have time for coffee before your hospital rounds? I'd like to refine our proposal before my board meeting. I can do better than that, he replied, checking his phone. My first surgery isn't until noon. We could have breakfast at the Shard. Their private dining room is perfect for presentation planning. The landing gear deployed with a familiar thud. Beth smiled at how different this arrival felt compared to her usual business trips. Instead of mentally rehearsing acquisition strategies, she was outlining diversity initiatives. Instead of calculating profit margins, she was considering human potential. As they taxied to the gate, Beth opened her contacts list and created a new entry. Dr. James Carter, Wings and Scalpels Foundation. Below it, she added, Priority, urgent/strategic partnership. Send me the presentation after your board meeting, Dr. Carter said as they gathered their belongings. I'll review it before my surgery and add any medical sector insights that might strengthen the proposal. They exchanged business cards, a curiously formal gesture after their transformative conversation. Beth noticed his card included a quote, Excellence rises on the wings of opportunity. The terminal was bustling with early morning activity as they cleared immigration. Beth's usual fast-track privilege seemed less important now. She found herself noticing the diverse faces around her, wondering about their stories, their potential, their dreams. My car's waiting outside, Beth offered. Let me drop you at your hotel before heading to mine. We can continue planning during the ride. During the journey into central London, they refined their initiative. Beth's assistant, reached by phone, was already scheduling meetings with HR, legal, and communications to begin implementing changes. First step, Beth declared, revising our hiring protocols. By next quarter, I want diverse interview panels mandatory for all positions. And mentorship pairings, Dr. Carter added. Cross-departmental, cross-cultural. breaking down those invisible barriers. They arrived at Dr. Carter's hotel, but neither made a move to end the conversation. There was an urgency to their planning, as if they both recognized the rare opportunity they had stumbled upon. "I'll see you at breakfast," Beth said finally. "Sieben Uhr morgens shop." "Wouldn't miss it," Dr. Carter replied with a warm smile. After all, how often does turbulence lead to transformation? 6 months later, the headline in Financial Times read, "Caldwell Industries launches groundbreaking diversity initiative in partnership with Wings and Scalpels Foundation." Beth stood at the podium, surveying the packed auditorium. Dr. Carter sat in the front row, beaming with pride as she announced their first cohort of 50 mints. Young professionals from diverse backgrounds entering both medical and corporate tracks. The program had exceeded their initial projections. What started as a chance encounter at 35,000 feet had evolved into a comprehensive development platform. Other companies were already asking to join the initiative. In the 6 months since that flight, Beth had restructured her entire corporate leadership approach. Her board, initially skeptical, had been won over by the data. Diverse teams were delivering better results, innovative solutions, and stronger community connections. Dr. Carter's medical mentorship program had expanded to include business training, while Caldwell Industries' executive training now incorporated lessons from healthcare leadership. The boundaries between sectors were blurring, creating new opportunities for collaboration and growth. But the real success stories were individual ones. Like Maria, a janitor's daughter now in executive training. Or James, a young black medical student completing a corporate internship while preparing for his residency. Each face represented a barrier broken, a life changed, a future reimagined. After the presentation, Beth and Dr. Carter met in her office overlooking the Thames. "Remember that flight?" she asked, handing him a glass of sparkling water with lime. His usual. "How could I forget? You couldn't get away from me fast enough," he chuckled. "And now I can't imagine building this future without you," Beth replied, her voice carrying genuine gratitude. On her office wall hung a new piece of art, a photograph of airplane wings against a sunset sky, with a quote beneath it: "The greatest journeys begin when we dare to cross the aisles that divide us." Outside, London hummed with activity. Somewhere in the city, future leaders were being mentored, barriers were being broken, and lives were being changed. All because a prejudiced CEO and a brilliant surgeon had shared a first-class cabin. Beth's phone buzzed, another flight confirmation. But now her travels weren't just about business deals. They were about building bridges one connection at a time. The horizon ahead was limitless.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.